Sustain267.
Welcome to the Sustain267 Podcast, where we host conversations on different issues affecting climate change in Botswana and the rest of Africa. I am your host, Bato Gilisitse. Today's conversation was inspired by an article I came across a few weeks ago titled "The Need for an African Union Special Envoy for Climate Change and Security." The essay was written by Dr. Crump and a brilliant African mind, Vane Aminga, a research assistant in the Climate and Risk Program at the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. Her research work focuses on the linkages between renewable energy development projects and conflict in East Africa. Previously, she worked at the Strathmore Energy Research Center in Nairobi, where her research focused towards eradicating energy-related vulnerabilities for off-grid populations, policy and regulatory reforms, climate change, and increased energy access. Vane has worked in disenfranchised communities of East Africa through a foundation that she founded in 2011, the Fly Sister Fly Foundation. She holds a BSc in Mechanical Engineering and an MSc in Sustainable Energy System from the University of Edinburgh. I reached out to Vane and invited her to join me for a conversation, and this is how it went.
Vane, thank you so much for agreeing to speak to me. So I reached out to you after reading your piece on the need for an African Union Special Envoy for Climate Change and Security. Would you mind highlighting the points on that? I mean, I could read it and re-say it, but I think it would be based from you. So why it would be necessary to have an African Union Special Envoy for Climate Change and Security?
Okay, thank you so much for reaching out and for creating time for us to speak today. The work that I'm focusing on is to look at how institutions are responding to climate change and security. So we have this term called climate-related security risks, and what this refers to is usually the wide and diverse array of security risks or impacts that are emerging from climate change, and how these are impacting different referent objects, and this can either be human security or state security. And so while working on our recent pieces on what the African Union is doing in this space, we realized that something was coming up in most of the AU communication, that there was a push to have someone, a champion, to be highlighting these issues at the AU level and at the international stage. And with the work that we've done initially here at SIPRI on institutional responses, we felt that this was really in line with most of the work that we had done. So seeing that there's a need for someone that is really championing for these issues within the union. And we wrote that piece just before the 32nd AU Summit last year. And we were hoping that it was going to be one of the decisions that were going to be passed at the AU Summit. And so as we speak today, we know that this issue has been discussed on very seriously at the AU level, but we are not privy to any information that is an AU Special Envoy or AU leader on climate change and security. And so this is a message that we keep pushing, even in our most recent outputs on the African Union's work. We also still highlighted that we need someone to really spearhead this kind of, or give direction on these issues within the continent.
Oh, okay. So I was saying, seeing as like it's been said before, with climate change, it amplifies different problems. So security, like you touched on earlier, poverty, and all of those different issues. So instead of having one special envoy, can't it then be something that's incorporated into the current in every existing body?
Yeah. So when you look at the AU structure, we have different champions or leaders who are sort of like providing strategic leadership on some of the key areas that are affecting development on the continent. And the climate security discussion, or rather the reason why we felt like we need a specific special envoy for this climate security is because it is a nascent field where which also is very important. When you look at how climate change is impacting human security, for instance, that is really touching on many different aspects of development, be it food security, be it water security, be it energy security. And so having someone that is just providing some sort of strategic leadership, or someone that is playing an outreach role on these issues, or someone that really owns, or rather someone that is really spearheading this discussion at the AU level. We feel that an envoy on this level is someone that can be like really crucial, because we realize that at the AU level, most of the security space is really given a lot of attention. So when you look at the Peace and Security Council, the AU Peace and Security Council, it is one of the most active organs of the African Union. It's actually also one of the most funded. So if you also bringing in this climate discussion and also showing that climate change, or rather the change in climate, has a role to play in the security landscape, and bringing this together, there's gonna be a room for coordination, and so you mentioned that maybe we need an envoy for every different or the different development mandates within the union. But I feel like it may not be all of them, because as having a climate security leader in the union is already someone that is going to be look at the climate change and security work from at the level of, also like streaming down to the level of the regional economic communities, and what is happening in the food security space, what is happening in the water security space, what is happening at, like issues around armament and disarmament, or we have this violent extremism, and we have seen linkages of how we have seen how climate change is exacerbating these kinds of issues. So we still really, and I also need to highlight that within the union presently, the discourse on how climate change is influencing security is really vibrant. It's actually among the most vibrant in the regional organizations that we've studied so far at SIPRI, and would like this momentum to be tapped into and have someone that is going to provide some sort of strategic direction, to ensure that it's not just momentum that is going to be lost in many other issues. Because we see now we have COVID-19, which is really slowed down a lot of the development targets, or rather the development programming, or many other, it's like it's really halted, or rather brought many things to a standstill. And if you already had someone at the union level who is in charge of these issues, then we would not be worried that, okay, the African Union's really vibrant and encouraging discourse is going to be lost somehow. As the continent keeps to battle with, COVID-19, with limited capacity.
So get someone so that let's not only start things, but let's also have a strong middle and a strong end, not just a strong start.
Yeah, I agree with
So something that we keep mentioning, I think between you and I, we've mentioned it 5 times, but haven't defined what it means.
Yeah.
Related security. Most of the people who listen to the podcast, they don't study climate change. They're not activists. They're not enthusiasts. So something like climate-related security, what is it?
Yeah, so obviously different research angles have different definitions to this, but I guess for our work, we look at climate-related security risks as we believe that it encompasses a wide array of array of impacts, climate impacts or risks that are emerging from climate change. So we have in the AU paper that we recently released, which I can send the link to you later. We looked at how climate change is affecting food security, and sometimes some of these issues are quite, when you listen to how they are described, you realize like, oh yeah, that is something that I know about, but you had not really conceptualized it in your head. So seeing how, for instance, an example of a food security issue, or when we're talking about climate-related security risks, would be how we've seen transhumance conflicts between pastoralists and farmers in northern Nigeria. We've seen issues around resource scarcity or food scarcity, also water scarcity issues. So communities are fighting, or other communities are having tensions over water issues. And so this is stemming from climate change, like there's less water because of climate change, and then there's tensions in communities. We've also seen maladaptation when you're looking at our climate, our energy security work, energy resource management work, seeing how energy development, even renewable energy development, is maybe exacerbating local tensions in communities, especially if the local the process of involving the local communities does not happen properly, or it's not conducted properly. So these are some of the, as I say, it's a wide array of risks that emerge from a wide array of security or tensions that emerge from from climate change. So that's how I would explain it, and it's in different fields. It's in different thematic areas, as I've mentioned. Food security. We've also seen it in the peace and security space. So maybe looking at examples of areas that are already facing conflict. So alias Somalia, for instance, where floods due to climate change, or droughts or famine due to climate change, floods have displaced people who are already, in a very insecure, violent environment, and these people have to move. So there's forced displacement, and to the areas where they're moving to, there's going to be tension over resources, scarce resources, and such issues. So I don't know if that's going to be, I don't know if that's still really, I don't know if I've been able to provide this definition on a granular level that someone can understand, someone that is not working in this space.
Yeah, I think you've broken it down quite well, except then you use the word maladaptation. What does maladaptation mean?
Oh my God. Okay. Maladaptation usually is, so we have climate adaptation, how some of the wide range of activities or mechanisms that we put in place to be ready, to plan for the future climate impacts. So that is adaptation. And maladaptation normally is when adaptation leads to unintended outcomes, So, for instance, we've seen maladaptation in the case of energy security, the case that I mentioned, whereby potentially, so renewable energy is being promoted as one of the ways that we are going to reach our climate targets. But if the renewable energy planning and development is not conducted well, we have seen cases where it's leading to some unintended outcomes, or rather unintended consequences in local communities. So, for instance, I'm going to just use one case that maybe you've heard about. We have the Lake Turkana wind farm in Kenya. So that is the largest wind farm in Africa at 310 megawatts. And this wind farm is really, it's a huge development advancement in the continent and in Kenya, because obviously it's increased the grid capacity for Kenya and power capacity, energy. Everybody is happy with it. Many people are happy with the project. It's created jobs. It's more power for industry. So really pushing the development agenda on the continent. But when you flip the coin, you realize that actually it's not all roses, because this amazing project that is going to, I can't remember the exact number of CO2 emissions that it's going to save us. But this project is also having some unintended outcomes in local communities. For instance, the land acquisition process. So there are lots of cases in court presently from the local people who are opposing the land acquisition process. So they say that this communal land was not acquired properly. And so there are grievances around the land issues. And at the same time, the way the Kenyan electricity system is, the way it operates, usually you develop power, you produce power and you sell it to the off-taker, and the off-taker distributes the power. So unfortunately, the grid, or rather the distribution lines, do not reach this area, this area where the wind farm is. So there are wind turbines in your backyard, and most of this area is among the most marginalized in Kenya. It's the people there, they live under, I have to say, maybe under 0.5 dollar cents a day. Very poor people. But they are not connected to the energy system. So they have wind turbines in their backyards. They are very, very poor people. But still, it's been a year since they started producing power, and they are still in the dark at night, and they are still cooking using dirty fuels, and they've been left, their energy development has not advanced in any way. So that is maladaptation, when climate solutions are still leaving other people behind. And that is why we are pushing for climate solutions that are inclusive and that do not leave other people behind, especially the most marginalized. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm talking a lot.
Please. I like stories because they contextualize. But even as you're saying that, I remembered a few days ago, I read something on carbon sinks. And they were talking about how with carbon sinks, for a quick clarification, so carbon sinks are basically areas where the forest, ocean, or other natural environments that are looked at in terms of their ability to absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere for the purposes of this conversation. But I was reading something that spoke of how with the demand for carbon sinks now, people are being moved out of their homes, like indigenous people are being moved out of their homes because people want to build carbon sinks, which I find so ridiculous. But I think I never ever thought of it that way. I think I saw it a few days ago and I was quite upset by it.
Yeah. So that's why we have local consultation, or rather civic education, is really important. Maybe these indigenous communities, some may be willing to move if you tell them why you're doing this, but you do not just come and move people overnight. I have seen cases where people have been moved for hydroelectric power development, still a renewable energy, supposed to be a renewable energy solution that for climate change. For the climate change discussion, but these people are relocated, and sometimes their livelihoods are stripped from them, and sometimes they are forced to change their livelihoods. There have been cases of pastoralists being forced to become sedentary farmers. And I don't think development is supposed to change people's, forcefully changing people's way of lives, without consulting them properly. And so there are many cases around maladaptation, but there is also many, many good projects happening across the world. Obviously, that needs to be. And some of these projects, even if they can be termed as having issues, they still really having great benefits in local communities. So it's these issues they need to be looked into and addressed on a timely manner as well, because we do not want to repeat what has happened in the fossil era. We don't want to have people fighting. We don't want to see wars over resources. So we just need to address these issues on a timely manner.
Yeah. So I think then going back to our earlier conversation on the AU and the possible special envoy, but now looking at the AU as a whole, what role could the AU play in trickling down the climate change policies and just, let's leave it at climate change policies for different African countries?
Yeah, so I remember when you contacted me, you were asking about, first of all, if there are policies in place. And I'd say yes, because the analysis I did for my work, the work that we have done on the African Union, there were many, many policies that I had to look through to be able to see if any of those was linking climate change to security. So there are many policies, and as you may have heard before, in Africa we have really beautiful, many policies. Many countries have very beautiful policies, very well written, very well articulated. And so what I would propose for the union, and there's work happening. So if you look at our work, you'll see that some of the policies, they have made some progress. So especially on food security. So obviously linking food security and climate change. There's been, because over 60% of the continent, people on the continent rely on agriculture for their livelihood. So food security is huge. It's a huge issue that needs to be looked into very seriously for us to be able to address development and even the livelihoods of people. So the climate change discussion of food security has started very long time ago. I think it started. We have the AU's formation or rather the transformation of the Organization of African Unity to the African Union in 2002. And then we have policies from 2003 on agriculture, and these are also referencing climate change in there. And for instance, the Comprehensive African Agricultural Development Program, so it's called CADEP program. It's a policy document. It's really shown that Africa can have its own tailor-made solutions for other policies that can positively transform the continent, because this policy has shaped the food security space tremendously. And there are areas of improvement, definitely, but this is homegrown solutions for the continent. And so what I would say needs to be done is there's a need for coordinated action, because sometimes the AU feels like it's in its own utopia. I remember when I was in Kenya and I would hear people talking about the African Union. It didn't feel like it was an organization that was within reach for me as an African, as a Kenyan. I felt like that is just an elite organization for some people. So there's a need for coordinated action to ensure that the good work that the African Union is doing on climate change and security, and all the other aspects of, or rather the other amazing work that the AU is doing, even now in its COVID response, all this work needs to be, there's a need to ensure that all stakeholders are involved. People understand what the union is doing. African youth, that's the engine of the continent now and tomorrow. African youth need to understand what the union does and also feel it, and be part of it. There's a lot to be done, definitely, because now I've worked in the union and I realize that they are doing a lot of great work. But when I look at myself back in the day before I understood what they're doing, there was a huge gap. I felt like I don't know who they serve, and I don't even know about their policies, which is quite different from other regional organizations, because I'd say like now being in Europe, you feel like there's EU youth that, EU youth this, and people, it's quite accessible. So there's a need for accessibility. The AU has to be very accessible for all stakeholders, young people especially, and other marginalized groups or vulnerable groups. People need to feel like it's accessible, and then they can feel like the policies are working for them. And then something else would definitely be more coordination between, because you see the AU is comprised of these 8 regional economic communities. So we have the SADC, we have COMESA, we have ECOWAS and others. But these ones have, and then you always find, from what we found, is that they're all working on very good projects, but there's limited coordination between the communities themselves and from the AU and the communities. So some have some advanced work in the climate space. SADC has done some really great work, especially now since there are water security issues in the southern parts of Africa. So the SADC is really advocating or advancing its water security discussion seriously. And because there are continuous droughts in the north, in the Horn of Africa. So there's a lot of work, climate change work happening in the Horn of Africa region. IGAD, the IGAD as a regional economic community, is doing great work there. ECOWAS is dealing with violent extremism, in Nigeria. So there's a lot of collaboration is key. And this is one of the things we are even seeing from this COVID times, that, countries have to work together. And so countries as AU member states need to work together. Regions have to work together. And the African Union, as the continental interlocutor of these issues, has a huge role to play in ensuring that this kind of coordination and working together happens. Yeah.
I think then picking off of something that you said at the beginning of just as you were getting into your response.
Yeah.
The AU has policies, but we don't know about them. But are we seeing them? Not are we seeing them happen? Maybe as Bato, because I'm not a climatologist or a scientist, I don't know what to look for exactly.
Yeah.
But policies that are in place, are we actually seeing them happen?
No, so our work showed that most of the AU has beautiful policies, but the implementation is lagging behind. And that is the same case for even country level policies. We have many, many good policies in different countries. And so this is not unique. Many policies, as I said, we analyzed 16 policies for the climate security work we did. And I think out of that, we didn't analyze the implementation of just 2 since they're very recent. And out of all that, none has proper implementation mechanisms. And for some, they're just documents. There is no implementation mechanisms highlighted. No one, and there's not even a sense of ownership. No department has been tasked with implementing. So having a document with no ownership, or rather with no mandates on who is going to execute this, is sometimes, it makes it not, it's a policy, but it's not a policy, at the same time. So, but there have been, best practice policies, I'd say, on climate change or on environmental conservation, because I think this go together. So we have the plastic ban in Kenya. And when this policy was passed in 2017, I was in the UK. And I remember when I was traveling to Kenya, and in the plane, there was an announcement that now we are getting to Kenya, and if you have anything that is made of plastic, you need to keep it away because you're going to have fines or you're going to be arrested because Kenya is a plastic-free country. And I was like, okay. Wow, all right. I was really proud, because there was a lot of plastic in the UK. I am in Sweden now. There's a lot of plastic. They are working on that, but there's still a lot of plastic. And the plastic ban in Kenya is one of the policies that we can see that actually we don't even need to we don't need to, wait for developing countries to be able to implement their policies and then we can translate that to local contexts. No, we can also be, we can be the bearers of this, showing that so long as you believe in it. But definitely in Kenya still you can feel the impacts of this policy. Many people still don't use plastic, but definitely I feel like it fell short on some areas because they didn't really do proper civic education. They didn't teach local people why they were doing this. So it was a policy that was just implemented. And for a while, yes, many people did not use plastics, but now plastic paper or plastic, they are trickling back. Single-use plastics. I'm talking about single-use plastic. They are trickling back into Kenya again because many people they feel like maybe they were doing it for the government. But if they had been told that we are doing this for our environment and for them to really own this, then I think this was going to be one of the most successful policies we've seen in Kenya. And but still, sometimes the environmental team, they do walk around and arrest a few people. So there's something happening. But it was really beautiful to be able to see that. So that can also be translated into the climate space. Need to show that we can also have best practice policies that other countries, developing, non-developed, that they can learn from. Yeah.
With and that plastic policy actually went beyond Kenya, because I remember there was the one time I was in Ethiopia with a Kenyan and we had gone to the market and he was getting his stuff packaged. He kept trying to tell them that no, you can't put it in plastic because I can't get into the country with that. He was going straight to the border to the airport from there. So I was like, it's pretty awesome.
Yeah, that was really, I was really proud at that moment. I'm like, this is where we should be heading to,
So I guess then going back to the AU, it then becomes the thing of how do we then address the unexecuted policy issues, looking at the fact that it is possible to execute a policy, looking at the plastic one.
Yeah.
Is that then where the climate change special envoy steps in? And until then, how do we then get these policies realized and move them from beautiful English on paper to beautiful policies in our lives that we see?
That's really a really good question. And yes, that's where the envoy comes in, having someone that has been tasked with this work, or someone that knows that someone that is passionate about this, passionate enough to own this and push it forward. And at the same time, I believe that the coordination that I talked about before is going to make it easier for the AU to be able to implement various policies, because working in silos has been a challenge for a long time. So you'll see that since peace and security issues, they are funded, they are more financially supported. That means that the peace and security work there's more implementation happening in that space compared to maybe areas such as climate change, which are they've been pushed to the corner for a while. So bringing these issues together, coordinating the areas, bridging these silos, bridging the various silos at the AU level, will ensure that some of the organs which have, I would say, like we say that the Peace and Security Council has a normative agenda setting ability. So this will enable these other institutions or the other organs to be able to benefit from that. And meanwhile, the Peace and Security Council does not need to, in its recent work to understand the root causes of conflict, they do not need to start working on that by themselves, but they can learn a lot from these other departments, people working on climate change, people working on agriculture, people working in local communities. We have looked at the Department of Early Warning and Early Response Mechanisms, and seeing how this kind of information can be, it can be fed into the peace and security space. So overall, I feel, I believe that coordination, on top of having this strategic leadership within the AU, coordination is going to really move things forward in a very at the speed at which a speed that is going to ensure that maybe we attain Vision 2030 and Agenda 2063. But if we will continue to work in silos, then this is going to be we have a long way to go, definitely.
Definitely. SDG 17, partnerships. We need to see that.
Yes, there's a need for partnerships and meaningful partnerships. Well, at that.
We've had this whole conversation on the assumption that we need a policy. But the reality is the policies that are there aren't being actualized. So doesn't that then beg the question of, do we even need a policy to begin with?
Yeah, I do believe that obviously policies, they are sort of like the roadmap that is going to guide whoever. The reason why we have policies is to ensure that when we are working on a specific objective, even if we are not there, someone else can be able to execute that objective. So yes, we do need these policies, and it's great that we already have the policies because we are not starting from nowhere. But definitely, some of the policies will need to be reviewed. So, for instance, we have the AU climate change policy. I don't know the exact name. I can check later. But this has been, it's still in its draft form since 2015. And there's been some of the people we've spoken to within the union, they feel like it's one of the starting points if we are to be able to accelerate this, the AU's work around climate change and security, climate change and development. The AU climate change for AU policy for climate change. I will need to find the exact word for you. This policy needs to move from draft form and become an actual policy with actual implementation mechanisms, as I said, and it also has to be tailor-made, or rather it has to reflect the realities, the present realities that the world that we are living in. So, it's not just because I think when it was drafted, the climate change and security discussion was still not as vibrant as it is now within the union. And this also has to be reflected, trying to show how climate change is affecting the various security dimensions within the continent. So, the policies are there, but they just need to be sometimes a bit of tweaking to reflect the actual realities in the continent. And, or rather, if the policy is very recent, then it's just ensuring that the implementation mechanisms, they exist, and also ensuring that they are funded, because sometimes the capacity, it does not exist as well, financial capacity or even institutional capacity for implementation. Yeah.
Okay, definitely. A strong case for policy. So I guess we're not completely giving up on it yet.
No. We need policies. But I'm not very keen on new policies. I'm more keen on can we already implement what we have and see where that is taking us, and then we can start working on new policies, because as I said, there are so many policy documents, some which can be they need to be one policy, they need to be one policy, but so these siloed approaches, as I said, they need to be, we need new energy to bring them together and tap into this potential.
And as we close our conversation, if there's one thing that you would like to highlight from your time working doing research around climate change and climate-related security and policies, what's like the one thing that you would be burning to share?
Wow, one. Well, the one thing that's, after working in this space, the one thing that I would be wanting to share, or something that I would really wish to see, is I really hope for a time when there's more African voices in this discussion, because this is still a very global North discussion, but the people that are affected most by climate change, for instance, they are in the developing world. Africa, for instance, is just contributing less than 4% of the global emissions, but it's bearing the highest, it's taking up the highest brunt of the climate change. We see Cyclone Idai and Kenneth in Mozambique last year. We've seen people dying of hunger. We keep seeing people fighting over natural resources and all these other issues that are stemming from the impacts of climate change. So, yes, it is happening, but why is there a huge gap between the people that are talking about climate change and the people that are actually suffering? Why are we Africans quiet about these issues? What African youth, why are we not really angry enough to be able to, to talk, to speak about these issues, to call out our governments for policies to be implemented, to call out our governments to, negotiate properly in international forums, negotiate proper deals for the continent? Why in the climate strike movement, why is it still very centered in the global North? Why are African youth not? Why? There's a lot of whys. So my hope is that the more the world keeps changing, and maybe in the near future, this discussion, the climate discussion, is very, the people that are suffering most, they need to have their voices out, or loudest voices about these issues. Otherwise, it's going to take a long time before we can have solutions. It's going to take a long time before even the policies that we are trying to say that they need to be implemented. It's going to be a long time, because the business as usual scenario has failed us, and many people may not live long enough to see these policies implemented. Some of them have been around for over 10 years and still nothing, not even a single implementation. My parting shot would be, why are Africans quiet about these issues? Why are we not angry enough? So that would what I would ask. Why is there less research by Africans on this issue? Why is there, online and really good job for what you're doing? I think this is, steps towards the right direction, but we need more voices. We really need to, I want to feel it. I don't need to read this on the paper that, oh yeah, Africa is suffering, climate change is affecting Africa this much, but then I don't see it when I'm in the continent. People are content. And so we really need to up our game on that space. Yeah.
I really agree with you. We need to Africanize the environmental and climate change conversations and just have more African voices. I don't know if I'm looking in the wrong place. Twitter, I actively look to follow African voices on climate change and environment across the continent. They're not very easy to find. Just yesterday, I think on my Instagram status, I asked people to recommend for me people who are working within the environmental climate change space. And with people from, let's say, the global North, you don't even need to go looking for you. They will find you if that's your area of interest. So definitely more African voices in the space. At Sustain267, we're trying to amplify the ones who are already there, or the one who maybe are already there but aren't heard. So what stood out for me in our conversation, partnerships, relevant and timely responses that leave no one behind, and in closing, partnerships. And again, partnerships. Thank you so much for making time to speak to me, Vane.
This week on AfricaBytes, we are in Botswana's neighboring country, Namibia. We speak to environmental scientist come agripreneur who is in the fish business and fellow Resilient 40 member Eva Shitathala. First thing I wanted to know was how she understands climate change.
So climate change to me, it's actually the changing climate patterns. So which actually means that the climate is changing faster than we actually is supposed to be. So, and that is visible in several aspects. So we see that now in countries that never used to experience so much rain is experiencing flood. We see that some desert countries like Namibia are becoming more drier. We see several natural disasters happening in different parts of the world that never really used to happen. So for me, that is actually the changing climate, and it's actually affecting each one of us. So we are affected in many other ways.
Great that you touch on that it affects us. But how has it affected you directly as an individual?
Okay, so what happened is that in Namibia, if you follow up on climate actions, we also see that Namibia is becoming more deserty. We are struggling with even water. So last year alone, we couldn't have enough. No, the year before, we couldn't have enough rain. So many people in Namibia, including my family, we are subsistence farmer. So we actually, during the beginning of the year, we grow crops. And this couldn't happen. And then many families that are farmers also like doing livestock, they have also lost most of their livestock last year, including my own family. And the other thing that has also affected me, I think I would speak on in terms of business, is actually that you see that due to climate change and in the industry that I am, the blue economy, we are affected, not only because of overfishing, but also many fish species that are actually depleting and extincting due to climate change, that the weather is becoming too hot here. And sometimes it's just uncertain for one to actually plan and see. And the other thing is also that I don't have enough supply for my clients because, relying on basically sea life is one thing. And then with the climate change, it affects the oceanic environment. And this affects also the output of what comes out, which is one of the products I'm actually relying on, which is fish.
What's the one thing you wish people knew about climate change?
Okay, so that one thing is that we are all affected and we are all on the same boat. We may not be affected in the same way, but climate change is affecting each one of us. And it is actually, when you even look at what is happening today, we could say that it is due to climate change that we also experiencing these new outbreaks or pandemics like COVID-19. And look at all of us where we are. We all can't travel now, and because of that. And also some people are losing their jobs. And then we see that also the funding that might be aimed at fighting climate change might be directed somewhere else. So if we don't put our efforts together and fight climate change, we might be able to lose the one thing that we all rely on for a living, which is this earth.
And then in light of everything you just mentioned, if there was one action that you wish everyone in the world could take, what do you wish that action to be?
I think start where you are. And it can be, planting, trees. It can be also, growing your own vegetables. It can be saving water. It can be reducing, emissions. So anything that each person can do to contribute to that, I think those are some of the actions that I can encourage other people, everyone to do. And people are involved in so many activities. You might be a politician, you might be a farmer. So use things that are environmentally friendly or to contribute to a better environment. And also mobilize people. Sorry, I spoke of too many things though.
It's okay. It's okay.
Yeah.
We believe in abundance. The more, the better. And what are you doing as an individual, as Eva, to contribute towards the efforts of addressing climate change, if anything?
Okay, so I am actually involved in a couple of things that I'm doing. One of it is being part of the youthful network that is advocating for climate change, climate resilience in Africa. So this is actually where we just exchange ideas, learn from other people, also bring our efforts together, because we know that, when we are together, we have a bigger voice. So that is one of the things that I'm doing. And secondly, I am actually focusing more on blue economy and saving the blue economy. So my business is built on sustainable consumption and also preserving the oceanic environment, and looking at how we can end hunger, because we see that as food is running out on the one hand, and the fish resources is running out, bringing in effort of aquaculture, farming, and so forth, and also educating people and raising awareness on how to consume locally in order to reduce carbon emission, which is one of the contributing factors to climate change.
You are doing quite a bit. And on my part, as another African who's staying on the continent, I appreciate your efforts towards this.
Thank you so much, Pato.
A huge thank you to you for listening to this podcast. Actually, so earlier this week, a fellow Motswana podcaster, Effie, who hosts the podcast Some Black Guys Thoughts, please check it out. He sent me a screenshot of the Sustain267 podcast ranking as number 1 on the iTunes chart. I'm not sure how the algorithm works, if it's region or only in Botswana, but either way, I was quite chuffed by it. Thank you for making that happen. Please connect with me either on Instagram or Twitter at @IAM_Patoke. Share interesting articles or just cool climate change and environmental related stuff that you find interesting. If you'd like to support the podcast financially, please become a patron from as little as $3 or about 30 pula a month. The link to our Patreon is in the show description. Alternatively, or additionally, please drop us a rating on your preferred podcast listening app and recommend us to friends and family. I am the host of Sustain267 Podcast, Pato Gilisitse, and the sound engineer is Maleho Makhoti. Like our Facebook page, Sustain267, we will also be sharing this episode and continuing the conversation. Please share your thoughts on Vane's closing questions. Why are Africans quiet on climate change? Why are we not angry enough? And why isn't there more academic research on this issue by Africans? As you know, the COVID-19 pandemic is still upon us, with infection rates in Africa rising and lives being lost daily. Let's continue to follow safety regulations so we and our loved ones stay safe and stay alive. Take care.
Sustain267.